Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and in today's video we'll be taking a look at the corruption gear system and talking a little bit about it. I've got plenty of time on PTR to explore the gear system. I've also been listening and reading a lot of the feedback other people have, and I wanted to kind of combine all of the things that I've seen and also some of my experiences with the corruption gear, my personal thoughts on the pros and the cons of this gear, and what Blizzard could do in order to make a good system. This is going to be the very last system for patch 8.3, the very last patch of Battle for Azeroth. But even if it's a system we might not see ever again, hopefully it will still be a good system. This is enough if this system doesn't work properly or has some kinks that are never ironed out, can still put a bad taste in people's mouths. You do want to give people a good system because with the next new expansion you got to give them something to be excited about. So hopefully Blizzard will try to make this as best as they can. This is a system we'll be playing for quite a bit of time with a brand new raid, the probably what looks like last season of Mythic Plus and the last season of PvP. So it better be good. The corruption system is an ambitious way to replace the Warforging or Titan Forging. I believe that Warforging will still stay in the game, so gear can upgrade by 5 or 10 item levels, and it still can get extra stats like Leech, Avoidance, and Speed. So it seems that Warforging will stay and won't be such as big of an impact, but Titan Forging is what's been very controversial. So to replace Titan Forging, corruption needs to be good. But what is corruption like so far? So when a piece of gear is corrupted, that means it has a positive and a negative effect. The positive effect will be a variety of different buffs and of different tiers. You may have a buff like increases the value of all the haste on your gear by 2%. And this can come in different tiers. Tier 1 will be 2%, Tier 2 will be 3%, and Tier 3 will be 4%. So the better the tier, the more value you get out of the enchantment. The enchants come with a variety of different enchants, from increasing how much health you do regenerate while in combat, to how much leech you have, how much healing you take, or how much damage less you take from damage over time effects. But you also have very powerful bonuses like increase to your crit damage. So you have a variety of different buffs, but not all of these buffs are equal in value. Some are obviously stronger, some are not as strong as others. But every single piece of corruption gear comes with a buff, but also a debuff. The debuff is going to be a set amount of corruption, and your character is going to start building up a corruption stat. The more corrupted gear you have, the more corrupted your character is. The more corrupted your character is, the more debuffs you start with. There's a different variety of debuffs you get. The first one is going to be a chance on your abilities that your character will actually be slowed by like a void tendril. Then if you get more corruption, you will have a chance to spawn a zone on top of you on your ability usage that will damage you if you stand in that zone. Then if you continue adding more corruption, it will add an extra debuff where a void tentacle monster will spawn and chase after you, and it will do damage to you if it catches up to you. Any corruption past that is simply a debuff that makes you take more damage and reduces how much healing you take. The more corruption you get, the stronger every single one of those buffs becomes. So the slow debuff is going to get stronger and a more punishing slow the more corruption you have. All the abilities that do damage to you, the debuffs, are going to do more damage with the more corruption you have. The corruption gear can be cleansed, removing the corruption aspects, but also you remove the beneficial buff. So the idea behind the corruption gear is to manage how much corruption you have and choose which pieces of gear to wear, so that certain pieces of gear become more than just their stats. Even if you get a bad piece of gear, let's say it has, I don't know, versatility and mastery, and those two stats might be your worst stats, if it has a buff to increase your haste from gear, or maybe give you leech, or make your crits do a little bit more damage, or any variety of buffs that are beneficial, and that means that piece of gear can actually be useful without increasing the piece's item level, but instead giving it an extra buff that you might find beneficial. The system has benefits and has negatives, and I kind of want to talk about all the pros and the reaction from the community as well as all the cons, what this system potentially could be, because it isn't finalized, and I'm really hoping the Blizzard doesn't release it as it is right now. There's still some work to be done. The benefits of the system is that a piece of gear can now be useful even if it doesn't have good stats for you. In the prior, you would get a piece with, let's say, a 430 item level and it has trash stats for you. You don't want it, so you just throw it away, vendor it, or maybe scrap it for mats. And now a piece of gear can have bad stats but can have a beneficial buff, so you might want to keep it depending on your class and spec. Sometimes you'll get a piece of gear that's corrupted, it has great stats, but you cannot use the actual corruption. Then you could always go and cleanse it, and now you have yourself a decent piece of loot. You also do stop any kind of massive upgrades that somebody would get from, let's say, a heroic or a normal raid or maybe an LFR, so you won't have people walking into LFR and getting the highest item level pieces with all the sockets, bells, and whistles. You also will be able to manage this corruption with your cloak that you'll be able to upgrade over time. That doesn't mean it's a mandatory piece of content if you do want to get yourself more damage, but the more you upgrade your cloak, which everybody will receive a quest for patch 8.3, the less corruption you'll deal with. There are also Azeroth essences that you can run that reduce the amount of corruption you have. Some of these essences are very strong, primarily for healers and maybe even tanks, but for DPS, one of them is really good, and the other two are kind of up in the air. The passive effects are not terrible, but in a sense you will be kind of sacrificing some of your damage output from your essences, but now you can get some damage back through raw stats or raw increases through these extra corruptions from your gear. So it'll be a bit of an interesting system where you're trying to manage corruption, but also have a little bit of a give and take for your character. Sometimes you'll have to sacrifice aspects of your essences in order to get more throughput value on your gear, and that'll be a meaningful decision for a lot of players to make. It's a little bit of a math, but it's really just managing that corruption number and then trying to figure out which pieces are the best for you. Of course, that does mean more simming, which we are going to start talking about some of the negatives of this system. First of all, not all of these enchantments for the corruptions are made equal. Some of them are much stronger than others, primarily the enchant that increases the amount of critical strike damage that you have. Right now, my character actually have all of my abilities at max critical strike damage increase, and if you combine all the effects together, it's about a 37% more critical strike damage. Now that means that this enchant is insane, and even if you got it on a low piece of gear, you would actually use that piece of gear over a 445 piece of loot. These new enchants are gonna artificially increase the item level of your pieces. Even though they don't actually increase the item level of a piece of loot, the enchant itself is so damn powerful that you might as well use it, because it is going to be the strongest damage output for you. Of course, you also have to manage the amount of corruption that you have, so that means more debuffs to run on you, and sometimes that could create a little bit of an uncomfortable situation. Of course, that simply means that people are going to be sitting on raid bots and simming their character even more than before, because it's kind of a lot of stuff to get through. That's another feedback, or piece of feedback that I've been hearing here and there, is the systems in BFA have been so complex compared to the other expansions. A lot of people are very excited about the future expansion, whatever it may be, even if it is Shadowlands, to have more of a simplistic system, where, like in classic World of Warcraft, you can take a look at your pieces of gear, do a little bit of math, and figure out what is going to be good for your character, instead of having to go on a separate website so that it can tell you what's going to help you do the most amount of damage. The Azeroth system, Essence system, and any buffs and debuffs for our characters, whether Blizzard buffs certain abilities or tunes them to do less damage, less healing, whatever it may be, can drastically change how your character plays and drastically change what is going to be best in slot for your character. So having the complex system and more complexity with 8.3 is something that not a lot of people really want. It also means that RNG is going to be an issue, kind of like how with Benthic gear, if you did any of the raiding and you were trying to look for a specific best in slot Benthic pieces with a socket, that's basically what this corruption is going to do, as some of these enchants might be much better than a socket. So even getting a lower item level piece is actually going to make it a higher level piece. So Blizzard, instead of making, let's say, the hardest pieces of content, mythic raids, we could offer you the best gear. Instead, a heroic raid or a normal raid with an insane enchant or insane corruption might be enough to make that piece of gear incredibly powerful for your character. Blizzard has been doing a little bit of balancing. For example, the amount of stats you would get from a corruption enchant is going to be static compared to, let's say, the amount of corruption you have. So the stronger the enchant, the more corruption. The weaker the enchant, the less corruption you get. So at least it's not a flexible number where you just have to re-roll over and over and over, but it does add a little bit more RNG to the system. It does create a lot of complexity. It is going to be kind of a weird system, at least in its early iterations, and hopefully Blizzard does more to iterate upon the corruption system. I mean, to put on a piece of gear that actually gives a debuff for your character, but a very powerful buff, is an interesting idea. It's a risky plan, but a risky plan could have a payoff if you're able to manage it well. So the idea of reducing how much corruption you have based on essences, certain sacrifices in order to get gains in other areas, is interesting and exciting, but only if Blizzard does this right. This is where feedback from all the people that are on PTR, giving feedback on the system, is very, very necessary. It's the last patch for Battle for Azeroth, but I still would want it to be a good one. I would want the gearing system and the gearing mechanics, the gearing aspects to at least be fun and memorable rather than leave a bad taste from my mouth for the next expansion. But that's everything I have for you guys for corruption. Hopefully I gave you guys a bit of an idea where it's at right now. I'll be looking it up some more whenever they have more updates post BlizzCon and PTR, because nothing has been happening so far. Thank you for watching, and I'll see all of you guys in another video.